Here we are with Don DeBar and Dan Kovalik, our beloved comrades in North America, here talking to us in Tortilla con Sal, based in Nicaragua. We wanted to talk to you, Don and Dan, about, because practically no one outside the United States has a clear idea or any kind of understanding at all, really, of the way events are developing domestically in the United States. And we can see, from our point of view, we're concerned at the complete unlawful decisions of the United States government, for example, deporting over 200 Venezuelan citizens who may seem to be completely innocent to a maximum security prison in, of all places, El Salvador, under Nayib Bukele, which is extraordinary. But it looks as though that level of unlawfulness is also prevalent domestically in the United States. And can you help us get some idea of what on earth is going on?
You want to go first?
Sure. I mean, clearly, the Trump administration has decided to go against its political enemies. And enemy number one seems to be people that are critical of Israel. In fact, they put together this, did you see this, Don? They put together, the Justice Department put together something called the October 7th committee, I believe is what it's called. And what they are, the Justice Department is dead set on going after anyone with the most tenuous links to Hamas or any Iranian proxies. You know, and they will go after them under anti-terrorist laws. And so, I think a lot of people are going to get caught up in that web. And they're even going after, you saw this FBI agent that was critical of Trump. He was fired by Trump, and he left the country, came back in, he was arrested. Coming into the country, they claimed for leaking declassified or leaking classified information or something, but clearly it was clearly a political retaliation. So I mean, it's a very dangerous time, I think, again, particularly if you're doing pro-Palestine work. And that was starting to happen even before Trump, that should be said. I'll just give one example, and then I'll turn it over to you, Don. In Pittsburgh, which is a small town, really, and it has a fairly small pro-Palestine movement. I would say, the protests get an average of maybe 50 people. If there's 100, that's really, really good. Well, out of those numbers, 30 are under indictment because of an event that happened on the college campus, many for felonies. I mean, that's a huge proportion of the entire movement in Pittsburgh. So, did you see, by the way, that Dr. Jill Stein has been charged?
No, I did not.
Yes, for her protest activities on Palestine. So, I mean, things are really rolling quickly and not in a good way.
I guess that these are the times that feature this, but it's after an election that seemed entirely binary, it's difficult to see where the binaries are here. And even I'm using plural intentionally, that there would be a series of them, that you would see through the issues ocean or universe. Michigan, Trump carried it with the help of the Palestine vote, the Muslim vote, because of Biden's policy with Israel, with the genocide that's been going on there since 1948, since October 7th, 2 p.m. or whatever. And so, looking at this attack on the very people that helped organize his election in a real sense,
yeah,
it's kind of bizarre. I know in Chicago, the protests primarily at the Democratic Convention were organized by people who were organizing over Israel's, murder of Palestinians. And that either that was pointless, that organizing, or it had an impact on the election. And if it had an impact on the election, then this was an intervention on behalf of Trump, and now he's going after his political support. The thing to me that's sort of baffling in all of this, I always say this, I don't with you guys, but when I'm talking to an audience of, lay people or whatever, that you have to keep in mind that the information that we come by the source is virtual, that we don't see this stuff up front. This is what we see second, third hand through various media, whether it's corporate media, state media from someplace, Bob's media on YouTube or whatever. These are things that are, an accumulation of, information bits that we've gotten second and third hand. So I don't know what's really going on. Is there really a fracture in the ruling class and represented by, the two candidates or the two series of candidates in the last election or over the last, 8 to 12 years? Or is that all, use George Bush's term, doo-doo show, deep doo-doo show for our benefit? I mean, I have to kind of ask that question before I can understand the rest of it, because it seems to me that if this was a real fracture, and if somehow Trump or the people behind Trump or that he actually is standing for cobbled together out of the disparate pieces outside of the the governing coalition, their own coalition of people that, like in Florida, I remember in 2016 that Trump carried both the Cuban exiles and also the Haitian exiles, who were politically, opposites. That there were all these, little cohorts that were sort of cobbled together into a winning, and in that case, not even majority, but a winning team for the Electoral College. Now, are we looking at, we can afford to throw away these different cohorts that were essential to us getting elected, and what are we building in its place to govern? Because I know there's a lesson in there assuming that the institutional memory is with Trump and his close advisors rather than the class that he represents, that remembers last time they got in, but they couldn't govern. And so this time they're going in and they have the benefit, for argument's sake, for political sake, of what had just happened to Trump over the last couple of years, that with a weaponized Department of Justice doing the obvious things that they did to him, that a good chunk of the population watching him do it in return would see it as it being done in return, so there's some justice to it, as opposed to they're spending all of this stuff to accomplish something, and they're throwing over one of the legs of support, just like who would dissent? I mean, the people that supported Trump last year were the dissent. That was the dissent. Now we take power and we're going to shut dissent down, including among those, a good portion of the very people that supported. It reminds me kind of the Night of the Long Knives, where once the Nazis took power, they purged the Nazi Party. And is that what's being done? And I hate to do that, because there's been so many facile references to the 1930s aimed at Trump, and more specifically and more dangerously, I guess, mischievously to be kind, aimed at the supporters, the so-called whatever Hillary Clinton called them, that the people that the people in Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Detroit and all these different cities in the Midwest that were the Rust Belt, that they were basically incubators for fascism and for Nazism. That once you take working class people and injure them, they're waiting for Hitler. That was that mythology's been kicking around since the 80s, really, around here, that explained Reagan's election, even, I think, to a lot of people that were, political commentators. And so now I'm looking at this. Is that what these people are thinking? That now that we have the levers of power, we're going to purge anyone who's come in with us or close to us. And who is it that gets to decide? Hi, we are the Israel lobby, and we have Joe Biden in the White House. And now, although we didn't do a goddamn thing they did something, I guess, Edelman and them, to get Trump elected, but now he's our boy in the White House. Like, what's the magic that happens off camera there?
Can I just, and before you comment on that, Dan, can I just add, before we started this conversation, I was suggesting to Don that looked at from the outside, it's almost as though the Democrat wing or the Democrat currents of the ruling elites, this fusion of corporate and state power in the United States, the Democrat wing of that is quite happy that the other side has taken over for the moment, because it enables that group to do things that the Democrats wanted to do but couldn't, like attack the middle class, destroy Medicaid, destroy Social Security, all that kind of thing. And so I just wanted to make that comment before you replied to Don, Dan. What do you think?
Well, I think that's very true. And you see the Democrats are very quiet. They're not taking Trump on. Even Bernie Sanders just voted, to, support Israel to the extent they need to what he would say, destroy Hamas. But what it is to destroy the Palestinian people. In fact, you saw, by the way, yesterday, this is according to Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, Israel killed 200 children in Gaza. It was the biggest day of child murders ever for Israel in their history. And so, and again, you have Bernie Sanders saying, go for it. So clearly on the big issues like Israel, there is no difference between the parties. I agree that they do function in this way that, like you said, the Democrats pretend that they support these social programs, but they're more than happy for the Republicans to cut them. Also, I think the Democrats know what a lot of us know, and that is that the economy is in very bad shape, that we're either in a recession or heading towards a recession. And so I think the Democrats are more than happy for Trump to be blamed for that. So, yeah, I mean, the two parties, while they seem at odds with each other, really aren't. And by the way, you mentioned, Don, Trump going after the people who helped get him elected, like, Muslims in Dearborn, Michigan.
Right.
But he's also going after the working class. I mean, he's threatening to fire 2 million federal employees. These are some of the best jobs in the country, union jobs. And a lot of, I think, of his base are a little surprised by this. Like, oh, wow, we didn't know that was coming. And even the tariffs, I think, are going to lead to higher prices. And he said he was going to fight inflation. Again, what has he done to do that? Eggs are now, depending on what eggs you get, $7 to $10 for 12. He's betrayed everything he promised, truthfully. I mean, and he doesn't seem to care that obviously people are going to be unhappy. I mean, it's really stunning to see what's happening.
Well, as far as it goes, the big thing, for a lot of people, of course, was, the existential question, which is to have a war with Russia or not. And it seemed clear that we were definitely headed that way if Harris had won or whoever would have actually been president. And that maybe if Trump were elected, we wouldn't. That seemed like the best you could hope for out of this election anyway. The question of federal workers is a particularly mischievous one for people that want to destroy the working class or further stress the working class. When public jobs, police, fire, various bureaucratic jobs continue to grow, salaries, benefits, etc., or at least maintain, while the rest of the union jobs and the working class in general was decimated. There's a revenge emotional, I guess, in any event, hoped for the people doing this, that the rest of the working class is not going to go out and march for the remainder that still has a job, who they don't feel they got that kind of support from when it was their turn on the chopping block. I don't know what it is. It seems like it's a move to continue the same, project that they were doing before, which is to destroy the working class down to the atomic level, basically. Where there's a union of one if you're lucky.
And the unions aren't fighting back. I mean, you don't see much. I mean, look, compare what's happening in the U.S., which is basically nothing in terms of public protest, compared to look at Turkey. They're about to overthrow the government. Serbia has had major protests. We pride ourselves as being this, democratic, free society. But where are the protests against all this? It's really incredible.
Well,
the
that case of the student, I've forgotten his first name, Khalil.
Yes.
And that there was a protest movement, a very strong protest movement on the universities against the genocide by the Zionists against the Palestinians, and that's been crushed. And one of the things that people outside the United States thought might improve with a Trump administration was a lessening in the creation of an extremely repressive censorship environment for people, and in fact, it looks as though it's getting worse.
That's right. It's just like one brick upon another, worse even. They didn't hesitate once they came in to take the next step. One of the problems that we've had, it's been pretty obvious really since 2003, is that no matter how large the protest is, like February 15th of 2003, where it was the largest protest in the history of the world against the coming Iraq War, had no impact on the Iraq War. We could argue that perhaps we didn't invade Iran because of that. That some lines were drawn that those in power were afraid to cross because of the size of the protests. But I think the size of it and how easily organized it was betrayed another fact, which was that actually there's no leadership ready to step into that. I mean, I'm not faulting anyone who was an organizer for that as being inadequate in one way or another, but it would be very difficult for me to name the half dozen people who would make an adequate interim government in the event there were a revolution in the United States, for example. And so, in terms of protest, its actual utility. I'm not talking about the right to protest, okay, and I'm not talking about about whether or not to use it as a marker of the repressive nature of the government, but I'm talking about in terms of actual struggle with the powers that be. The utility of protest under present conditions seems to be like nil, if not very, very minuscule. And so I'm wondering if, as we fight for that, are we fighting to scream to nobody in the forest again? Or should we be looking at trying to find tools that will allow us to actually force change if we can muster the majority to just utter it? Because it was clear the majority of American people were opposed to the Iraq War at the beginning. And yet, from February 15th to March 20th, we were at war.
Yeah, although, can I say a few things to that? I mean, what you're saying is true. Although I will say that it's the nature of protests in the U.S. that I think, frankly, make them futile. Unlike, again, if you look at what's happening in Turkey or you look at what's happening in Serbia, where you have sustained protests day and night, 7 days a week, what we do in the U.S. is have giant protests on Saturday.
Raids.
When no one is around, right? And then everyone goes home. Well, that doesn't challenge, it doesn't threaten anybody.
Right.
You can have as big of a protest as you want on a Saturday if you want one. And, we have to be more sustained in our protest. It can't just be a weekend. They talk about weekend warriors. You can't just be a weekend protester. And that tends to be what happens in the U.S. So I think, a different form of protest that's more sustained, I think could have a big impact. I actually think Trump would be susceptible or he would be, I think he would be impacted by big protests that were, against him.
Right.
Again, we haven't seen them yet. And the other point is the fact that they are crushing protests on university campuses seems to suggest they thought they were effective. They didn't like them. So I do think that protests can be impactful. But again, I think we need to think differently about how we do those things.
The protests that took place on campus that are being targeted, that I'm aware of, maybe I missed something because I haven't been following everything as closely as I generally do. But they seem to be things that were around, Israel's slaughter of Palestinians. It's the, what do you call it? The massacre or slaughter of the innocents that, people refer to with Herod, back at the time of the birth of Jesus Christ, according to the New Testament. On par, I don't know what the population was of, that area at the time of Judea and whatever, but I'd have to guess that somewhere between 10 and 100 times as many infants have been slaughtered now as Herod killed. And why haven't I seen one single newspaper report here make even a collateral reference to that, when references to Hitler and Mussolini and everybody else pop up every time somebody grows a mustache in politics or whatever? I mean, the slaughter of the innocents, it's a pretty generic term, right? They're slaughtered and they're innocent. Why are they innocent? Because they're babies and children. Well, when you slaughter more innocents now than were ever slaughtered during the slaughter of the innocent, that's a biblical reference. You'd think somebody would mention it, and they're not. And so what? I don't know. I'm off on that for a minute, but the reason is that if we crank up the protest to do something like start shutting things down, or something that will actually impact the economy or the operation of the highways or whatever, things that will interfere with everyday life, you're going to provoke a response that's either going to escalate or fold, or alter, reroute traffic and accommodate it to an extent so that it's ineffective or minimize the impact. What happens with the next step? So suppose it collapses, for example. But we're not. That was my point before. We're not prepared for the next step of struggle yet that I know of. I mean, I'd be damned if I know who I'm supposed to reach, contact, or whatever. Say like, okay, are you the new leadership, or are you organizing leadership? I mean, I've been talking to you guys and some others, but we don't really have that clique, that group. I don't know. Yeah. That circle. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Don. And one of the things that strikes me, looking at the United States from the outside, is that I might be wrong. Tell me what you think, but it seems to me that Donald Trump and his team are being quite acute about the way that they're kind of throwing all this stuff out and behaving in such a way that there's so many things going on that it's actually difficult for people to kind of fathom what's going on and work out ways to combat it. Because one of the things, for example, that they seem to be doing is almost creating a kind of parallel government with this. What is it called? The Department
Doge.
of Efficiency.
The Doge, yeah.
The Doge bags.
And the way that insidiously calls into question kind of even the legitimacy of what would otherwise have been unquestionable judicial power. And it just seems that the Trump's wing of the corporate political state power, is being very clever by kind of making it almost impossible for people. It's a bit like a tar baby, you know what I mean? And is that relevant at all? Is that?
Yeah, no, I think that's the goal. I think the goal is to rule by chaos. You know, as you say, because the courts can't keep up with him, the people can't keep up with him. It's very hard to stop when you have all these moving parts. Have you seen? This is interesting. I don't really know if I think this is a good idea, but it is interesting that one way. Did you see what people are doing to protest Elon Musk and Doge? They're destroying Teslas.
Yeah.
They're attacking Tesla dealerships. They're burning Teslas. Now, you know, some of that's crazy because, you know, you're burning a Tesla of some guy who maybe is a good guy. You know what I mean? Like, there's a certain randomness to it. But on the other hand, there is an anger that's brewing, right? And that is being expressed with this assault on Teslas. So anyway, I thought I'd point that out, at least in case you didn't know that in Nicaragua, that's happening up here.
Here's the contradiction. But we didn't have auto workers burning down auto plants as they were being laid off, or more importantly, taking them over. This is part. I want to go to the other thing but it's interesting. Targeting Trump, suddenly it's okay to burn down, Tesla plants or burn people's cars. Under any other circumstances, of course, this would be, an act of terror or God knows worse, if that's possible.
Oh, believe me, that they will go after people for terrorism. I mean, that there will heads are going to roll and I guess these Teslas, even when they're off, have cameras operating. So I mean,
I know
people are getting caught, but it's an interesting phenomenon.
On the other question, though, Trump's election in each case, you could argue, and it has been argued, rests upon basically an ongoing process of delegitimization of the whole entire power structure, but certainly the government, and certainly they've cooperated in that effort to delegitimize themselves with things like the lawfare and other things that we've seen, the 2020 election, et cetera, over the last 12 years. And so when you're starting out taking over what half the population at least sees as an illegitimate government, and then for the other half, by your taking it over, it becomes an illegitimate government. You're operating already in an environment in front of almost the entire population in one fashion or another of illegitimacy. And so when one part of the government attacks another part of the government in, let's say, novel ways, there's a cheering section for that, ready-made, depending on which side of the operation you're looking at that moment. In each case, you're going to find someone who supports the attacking of that particular institution by another one. It's built into the situation that we have now, and I think they're working it. And they're doing this at a point in history when the data set that they have at their disposal and the processing power that they have to manipulate and handle and utilize this data is unprecedented historically. They know what I had for dinner last night and maybe can calculate what kind of stomach acid I'm going to produce if I find out my guy had a bad day in the press yesterday, whatever that is. Certainly political activity, anything that people have written, things that people have liked, disliked, following a news cycle. You can crunch all of that stuff through computers and basically get, okay, what you need to say tomorrow is this in like one paragraph. And so this is happening at a time where you have, I mean, I'm exaggerating it to illustrate the point, but where you have that kind of control over what people are thinking and the pipeline to their ears, you can play a lot of games with the legitimacy game. I don't know how clear that was.
Sorry, Dan. Sorry, Don and Dan. Yeah, and before we started recording, I remarked to Don that one of the commentators on events in the United States, in an interview that I saw, commented that basically the position of the Trump administration seems to be to be saying to the courts, in effect, yeah, you go ahead and make your rulings, well, and let's see if you can enforce them. And what do you think of that, Dan?
Yeah, no, I think they are doing that. And of course, the founding fathers realized something that Trump realizes, and that is the courts really don't have any power. They don't have the power of the purse or the sword. So how are the courts going to enforce these things? And I think Trump is testing whether they will and can do it. And that means that the very rule of law is under attack right now, right? I mean, that really the rule of law operates to some extent because of the good faith of the other branches of government who are willing to listen to the courts. And if they're not, it's like what Stalin said about the Vatican.
How many legions does the
How
Pope
many
have?
legions do they have? None.
Right. Yeah, and I saw an astonishing clip on one of the programs that I was watching last night, trying to get ready for this conversation with you. An astonishing clip of this character, Kash Patel, who's now the director of the FBI. And basically, he was declaring war on any US citizen that supports Palestine.
Yeah, that's what's happening. That's what's happening. Yeah, I mean, I think it is a real fearful time, and by the way, this is happening across the pond as well. I mean, of some high profile people who've been arrested and harassed for pro-Palestinian activity, like Richard Medhurst, for example, is one of the more prominent ones. But I have a very close friend in Great Britain who's not prominent. People don't know her by and large. She's fleeing Great Britain because she's about to be arrested because of tweets, pro-Palestinian tweets. She's fleeing Great Britain. We live in we've crossed the Rubicon. We live in very repressive times in the West right now.
Yeah, so one question that I know most people who are concerned, we're very concerned about our friends in the United States. And we wonder, well, to what extent is this really a bipartisan attempt to re-engineer the very system, the very political and legal system and of the United States? And something that Don said earlier makes it sound as though that is indeed what's going on.
Yes, it is. And again, this began with the Democrats. They were the ones that started to crack down on Palestinian protest, wanting to, Chuck Schumer's been leading the charge to pass a broad definition of anti-Semitism that would catch people with, again, who just merely advocate for Palestine, even if they're Palestinians. I mean, that's the incredible thing. Even you're a Palestinian, you're not even allowed to advocate for your own people. But yeah, this is a bipartisan thing. And again, the anti-terrorism laws are designed to be an end around the First Amendment. And And, you see now, by the way, that Trump is now invoking the Alien Sedition Act of something like 1778 that's only been used twice. So, it is. The crackdown has begun. I mean, I don't want to be too pessimistic. We've been through these types of periods before, the McCarthy period, for example. And we've come out of them. But the next guy who helped us get out of the McCarthy period, a guy named John F. Kennedy, was murdered, probably by his own government. And I think, as Oliver Stone says, that might have been the last that might have been the end of the Republic. And I think we have to, start looking as historians at that, So there you go.
Hi, Don. Have you got anything? And we're pretty much up against. I think I'm going to have to wrap up because
Me too.
other things are going on. Sure,
no, I agree with everything Dan just said, and I just say that really working the concept of legitimacy. I think part of the process that Dan's talking about is that they're expending whatever drops there are left, so that there will be almost no one to defend what was or that people thought was, and then it'll be basically fighting over which version of the new thing is fed to which cohort. And I guess our role is to try to broaden that conversation and to educate people enough to realize that what's being offered is not the full extent of what's possible.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Dan. It's very kind of you both to give us so much of your time, and I hope I haven't complicated your day by getting you to take part in this program. Thank you very much. Look forward to talking to you again.
It's always a pleasure to talk with good friends and comments. I love you guys. Keep on keeping on. All right.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. Peace, guys.
Okay, bye-bye.